A reported 25% of American students are bullied at least once a day. What are schools, parents, and the community doing to stop this crisis? Joining me to discuss this are Ruslan Ali, Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights, who represents President Obama's new campaign to stop bullying, psychologist Jeff Gardere, contributor to HealthGuru.com, and Wilhelmina Stone, who lost her teenage son to suicide. Thank you all for joining me. Ruslan, I want to start with you. This conversation about bullying is being, distributed throughout the media right now. What exactly is bullying? When people talk about bullying, what are they talking about?
Well, there is no federal definition of bullying. It's state-specific. But when bullying rises to the level of harassment, when students cannot enjoy going to school, when they are hampered from learning, there is a really serious problem.
And what are some of the signs that we have of bullying? How do we know if our child's being bullied?
Well, remarkably, what we find out sometimes, and quite often, actually, a lot of our children don't talk about the bullying. They feel ashamed. So we do have to look for some of the subtle signs. And one of the biggest signs, of course, is if all of a sudden they lose interest in going to school. And, of course, the most obvious sign is if they're being physically bullied, that they will have marks. Then that's a real indication that something very insidious is going on the school grounds. And that's where we see a lot of the bullying taking place.
Ruslan, tell me about this initiative that President Obama has regarding bullying. What exactly is it, and what's the goal of it?
It's interagency. It spans the federal government. In the U.S. Department of Education, we commit millions of dollars, $410 million, to safe schools in an attempt to try and help educators deal with this problem. We've also recently released guidance out of the Office for Civil Rights reminding educators in schools and school districts, colleges and universities across the country that when bullying rises to the level of a harassing environment, then the school itself, adults in the school, become responsible, or the school could risk losing federal funds. Too many educators and adults across the country shirk it off, shrug it off as if it's a rite of passage. The unspeakable tragedies over the last several months, what Ms. Stone has been through with what happened to her son, tells us that this myth that it's a rite of passage, we need to flip that. We all have a challenge in this country to cure this crisis of bullying.
And that's why it's so important, Mark, that the schools step in, because statistics have shown when schools do programs, when they do assemblies, we see that the numbers of bullying, the incidents of bullying actually go down, because it is about educating and letting them know, you're right, that yes, we do see it as a rite of passage, but it is the wrong behavior to prove one's manhood or womanhood in the school setting.
Ms. Stone, so many people, think of bullying in a kind of abstract sense. They hear the stories, but they don't have a face or a name to it. One of the things that you've experienced in your own life was your son who was bullied. What exactly happened, and what was that like?
Well, what happened in his case, Joshua was his name, Joshua Jordan Stone. He was 15 years old, and it had been going on for some time, even throughout elementary school, and he just couldn't take any more. There was physical abuse in the school, in the hallways, in the classroom. There was name calling. There was calling our home at night at odd hours. There were just an array of different things.
And you made attempts to deal with this, right? I mean, you talked to the school.
Yeah.
You reached out. What kind of response did you get?
Well, administrators said that they would take care of it, that they would talk with his social worker, for instance, who had knowledge of the situation. Yeah. But they never interreacted. And therefore, the system failed us.
Ruslan, this story, which obviously is sad and unnecessary, seems to be a common occurrence, and it seems to be something that we hear more about, that the system failed. What do we do to stop the system from failing? What can the system do to deal with this?
Well, we certainly have a lot to learn. The president is utterly committed to this.
We've got to dispel this myth that bullying is just a normal rite of passage, that it's some inevitable part of growing up. It's not. We have an obligation to ensure that our schools are safe for all of our kids.
the White House will be hosting a conference early next year so that we can learn the tools, the best practices, so that we can help educators and parents and communities deal with this problem. Certainly it's about professional development so that educators and administrators can spot bullying and harassment when they see it, prevent it, and do something about it. It's also about enforcing the civil rights laws so that they understand that this perceived rite of passage is actually illegal according to our federal civil rights laws in education. It's about transforming communities so that students become more tolerant of one another and themselves. And it's about ensuring that our schools are safe havens for learning. Kids can't learn if they don't feel safe.
And isn't that the key, though, that it has to be prophylactic? You don't wait for it to happen and then have to react, because sometimes the systems do fail. That happens. But you have to get in there and educate kids about tolerance, about love, about acceptance, and that if they feel that they must say something to another student or that they have some beef to work out, that there should be proper conflict resolution instead of harassing or cyberbullying, which is so powerful and has destroyed so many lives.
Well, I'm glad you bring up this point of cyberbullying as well, because in the 21st century, it seems that bullying has taken on a whole range of forms, from intimidation to cyberbullying. The internet becomes another space for bullying. How do we pay attention to those? How do we keep track of all these new forms of bullying? It seems harder and harder to keep track of it all.
Well, the laws need to catch up with the technology. Social media technology has outpaced. No one could have expected what could happen when what starts off as a rumor gets sent around the world.
And that's a great point, because psychologically we haven't caught up. It is a culture shock. Kids and parents don't understand the power that they wield when they get onto the net and start talking about other people.
Well, I mean, one of the issues that your son was navigating in school was this issue around gender and sexual identity. He was at a point in his life where he was beginning to question, and other students identified that. That was part of the harassment, right?
That's correct.
Do you think the response would have been different if your son had been identified as a traditional, straight, young male?
I think so. I think so. As a matter of fact, I was encouraging Josh to cut his hair, and it was not easy for him. And one of the things that I regret was that let him be the person that he is, and that should be good enough.
That's right, and you did the positive thing, and this is what we need to do as parents, because we know that there is a statistic that gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning children are 4 times more likely to commit suicide versus heterosexual children, and that's without the harassment. So when you throw the harassment in, those children are at risk, and the thing that we need to do is to be there for them every step of the way, for all of our children, for gay, lesbian, bisexual children, and so on. I think sometimes there is a prejudice where they say, oh, well, the kid's gay, you know, let the community
that's my question,
deal
particularly
with
around
it.
this issue around civil rights.
Right,
Particularly around this issue of civil rights.
Right.
Because even as an African-American community, we often think about civil rights only as black people.
Right.
But even if we're talking about black people, some black people are gay, some black people are lesbian, some black people are transgendered, and if they're in school and they're being harassed not on the basis of race, but on the basis of their gender or sexual identity, we have to have the same sense of urgency, right?
And that's why there should be that safe haven,
It's a little more complicated
too.
than that. We don't hold jurisdiction over sexual orientation, but as in the case of Wilhelmina's son,
When you say that they're not considered protected
they're
in the
not
same way.
Considered a protected class in the same way that race is.
So if your child is being harassed for sexual identity, you can't file a civil rights.
Well, yes, you can,
Huh.
because as in the case of Wilhelmina's tragedy and so many across the country, students aren't bullied or harassed because they are gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual. They are harassed and bullied because they aren't conforming to traditional gender roles. Therein lies a very important distinction according to the civil rights laws. That said, when they are harassed because they aren't conforming to what we perceive of as male behavior or traditional female behavior, and it rises to the level of a hostile environment, it very well may violate the civil rights laws.
Wow, well, that's important insight, so that parents know that not only is this a deep problem, but that there are concrete solutions and steps that they can take to make all of this better. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
Calling a spade, saying that it's wrong, and having the adults and community members come around to suss it out and stop it.
We're back with our panelists, Ruslan, Jeff, and Wilhelmina. The topic is bullying. Wilhelmina, if you And you have the opportunity now to talk to other parents who are going through what your son went through. If you were to give them some advice, what might be one way you could tell them to get involved and to deal with this issue of bullying?
Well, first of all, to fight for their children and their safety. School should be a safe haven for our children. Secondly, talk to administrators, the PTA. We've all got to get involved, that it's not something that's just going to pass by us, and it escalates, and the worst possibility of the worst scenario is bullying that turns into suicide, which is the new term bullycide.
You know, I used to teach high school, and whenever I would call a parent about their child, I got the uniform response from everybody. Not my child. My child is the best. We spend all this time talking about kids who are bullied. What about the kids who are bullies? How do we get parents to come to terms with that and get them to do something about their child?
First, we need to spot bullying. We need to confront it. We all have a responsibility to ensure that bullies aren't empowered, that we don't feed that kind of anger that then breeds violence, or in the case of tragic suicides. So calling a spade, saying that it's wrong, and having the adults and community members come around to suss it out and stop it.
And step in to find out what is that bullying about. Yes, it can be your child, because we found out that kids who are bullying later on become bullied themselves, so it's interchangeable, but there's an emotional component there, especially for the child who bullies. And we need to find out what's happening at home that our child is now expressing these very aggressive behaviors. Is it a depression? Is it an anxiety? Are there other comorbidities going on where the child may be smoking or precocious sexually? So it's more of an emotional issue, and it has to be addressed.
Certainly finding the root cause is important, but we have to stop it. We can't reward it.
Sure.
We can't endorse it. We have to punish it and discipline it.
Thank you all for your time. Ruslan Ali, Jeff Gardier.
Thank you.
Wilhelmina Stone, thank you so much. We'll be right Assistant Secretary Ruslan Ali, Dr. Jeff Gardier, Ms. Wilhelmina Stone, thank you all so much for being here. That wraps it up for us here on Our World with Black Enterprise. Don't forget to visit us at blackenterprise.com. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Check me out on Facebook or follow me on Twitter. Thank you for watching Our World with Black Enterprise.